I welcome you to my home. Do come in, have a seat. I have something here to relax you. I think you'll find it quite a treat. If you find me sounding insane, it's just the absence of talking. It's just the
Welcome back to another episode of It At. This video is going to be a little bit of a departure from our usual topic of batteries and electric vehicle technology, but I promise to keep it kind of layered in with our usual focus of process engineering and how products are actually brought to market. So this video is going to be regarding a company called Theranos that is or was a absolute technological train wreck, and it's one of those things that didn't fail for the usual reasons that biomedical devices fail. We'll get into that in just a second. But the reason for my obsession with Theranos over these last several weeks, 3-4 weeks, is that I very nearly got caught up in it. If this company had been founded 3 or 4 years earlier, I almost certainly would have wound up working with them or for them in some capacity. And here's why. Right around that time, again, if we were to shift this back 3 or 4 years, I was working for a biomedical company and a medical device equipment rental company called Medic PRN, and I was repairing medical equipment, ventilators and infusion pumps and that kind of a thing. But I was also moonlighting it within the same company for a sub company or a company that was contracting out space within Medic PRN called INO, and that stands for inhaled nitric oxide. And that at the time they were doing clinical trials with the Stanford Children's Hospital, and what nitric oxide does is that when you ingest it or inhale it, it increases your body's ability to metabolize oxygen. And so they were using it in clinical trials on premature babies. And so that got me in, close contact with, within those kinds of circles. Well, Theranos, for those who don't know what that is a company that was trying to develop a blood analyzer, a way to do blood tests using a technology called microfluidics. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But what it would allow them to do is to do blood tests using a very small amount of blood from a finger stick instead of doing a full blood draw. Now, the idea behind that is to make this blood analytics a more personalized affair. In other words, you would have it be done straight in your doctor's office. You would have it be done at Walgreens was their, or Safeway, which was their idea. And you would do it using a la carte menu of what tests it was that you wanted done, and then you would go in and have these tests done immediately on this device, rather than what they do now is obviously they send it out to one of really basically only 2 labs in the United States that do this blood analysis, right? Depending on what it is you're trying to find out. Well, that got the attention of a lot of people to be able to make a machine that could do that. And again, just like a lot of technology in Silicon Valley, it was designed to disrupt. And had it succeeded, it certainly would have. But Theranos didn't fail in the same way that most biomedical device companies fail. And to understand that is the title of this video, where we're going to compare Align Technology, the company that I worked for, with Theranos. And I know that there isn't a direct corollary because I'm not trying to puff a line up and say that, oh, we were suffering the same thing through the same things that Theranos was. We weren't. We didn't have anywhere near the number of flaming hoops to jump through that you would, as you can imagine, if you're trying to design something to analyze a person's blood, because obviously there are a lot more steps to approval for something like that. But the comparison is a valid one in as much as those steps still have to be followed. And just because Align technology didn't have as many hoops to jump through, it doesn't mean that we didn't have to follow the exact same process. Well, let's talk a little bit about the founding of these two companies. So I'll start with Invisalign. What the hell? So Invisalign was founded by secrecy and Kelsey Worth, and they are both highly educated. Kelsey was, I believe, a Harvard business. She came to Stanford University for her MBA. Secrecy, he was educated in economics and also computer science. He also then went to Stanford to obtain his MBA, and that was where they met, obviously, and then they had this great idea that they would then dip their toe in the water and try and develop a medical device company. Now, by contrast, Elizabeth Holmes, the person who started Theranos, the original name of the company, I think, was called Real Time Cures or something like that, but for obvious reasons, she wound up renaming it because in the medical device world or in the medical world, you have to be very careful with what you call your company so that it's not misleading. And so she changed it from Real Time Cures to Theranos, which was a combination of therapy and diagnosis or something like that. So anyway, she attended Stanford for chemical engineering, specifically biochemical engineering. And by all accounts, she was quite a brilliant young lady. She was able to get herself into some rather high-level classes at Stanford. And so I'm not going to take the same tack that a lot of reviews on Theranos have that I've seen, in that she was a dropout and that she wouldn't have succeeded. No, absolutely not. She was a genius. She was a genius. She spoke Mandarin, and we'll talk a little bit about how that layers into some of what happened later, but in an interesting way, as life does. But she was not stupid. She didn't drop out because she couldn't handle the classes. And what I think the main takeaway from this video will be, for anybody who kind of follows the bouncing ball here, will be that she should have stayed in classes. She should have taken her idea. She should have tried to get whatever backing that she could to start her company. And while she is in the process of learning and gaining life experiences, she should have just continued on with her studies. So, at any rate, so that comparison as far as the founding of the two companies is fairly important because of her age and inexperience. But then what happened? Well, she wound up dropping out of Stanford because she felt that, in her own words, a couple more classes of chemical engineering weren't going to further what it was that she wanted to get done. Now, that's great, and there are a lot of success stories that have done the exact same thing. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, a lot of folks have, they dropped out to start their companies. Nothing new there, especially in Silicon Valley. But the Silicon Valley kind of ethos of starting a company oftentimes involves fake it until you make it. And so we've all seen a lot of different vaporware that has come out of the Silicon Valley. It's usually software, but sometimes hardware, electric vehicle technology. There's some stuff there with Aptera and some other places, other things that started in the Bay Area and just never went anywhere. But that's not a medical device, and so you can't really do the same thing with a medical device. Now, her initial idea was to use a patch or a wristband that would monitor, just like a Fitbit would monitor, all your heart rate and that type of a thing, but it would also measure your sweat and your blood. And the idea was then to take very small amounts of these substances and run them through some kind of a Star Trek analyzing device that would then report that information back to a home base or whatnot, and allow you to then get feedback on your health. Interesting. Obviously, she took this idea to her instructors at Stanford, and they told her she was insane, that there was no way that that was going to happen, and rightly so. That's absolutely accurate. So what she did next was, she didn't give up. She decided that, no, I can make this work through microfluidics because of what I've already seen as far as what other people were working with at Stanford and what she could see as the future. And so she dropped out, started to explain this idea for this new company to others, friends of hers. Her family is fairly well connected in Washington, as you'll discover later. That was a huge asset. And she had some pretty powerful neighbors. One of those neighbors, a gentleman named Tim Draper, actually loaned her $1 million. Invested $1 million in Theranos. Now, the thing that I find fascinating about that is that Tim Draper did that at a time when she was still talking about the Star Trek stuff. So she must have been very charismatic even then, and able to really be passionate about her idea and how to make this happen. And again, at this point, nothing wrong with that. People invest in all kinds of wild ideas in the Silicon Valley. We see that all the time. So now that she's got a little change to throw around, now she's able to actually start to approach the people that she needs. Well, one of her counselors at Stanford, she hired him on, and then it seems like the person that had the most amount to contribute was a doctor named Ian Gibbons. Now, it seems like, in my review of everything that I can find out about how Theranos started, that it was Ian Gibbons that first told her, no way, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to do a patch, whatever. But here's the minimum amount of blood that you can actually do microfluidics examinations on. And it was at that point that we get introduced to her, what she called her nanotainer, and she debuted the Edison device. And that was all right around 2005. She had formed the company in 2003. So again, those that are familiar with our approach and how we kind of dissect what goes on in these companies are familiar with the fact that I enjoy timelines. I like to look at what happened when. What are the time periods that we were talking about? Does something make sense? And again, that'll factor into this in just a little while. So in 2005, everything that I can see that she was after and that she was presenting and all that, it's absolutely fine. She said that she described the Edison device as a work in progress. Fantastic. Okay, so now it seems like true progress can start to begin. So she is hitting the circuit to try and, again, raise capital, as one does in Silicon Valley. Now, for her, she had a fixation a bit on Steve Jobs. She loved the way that he kind of revitalized Apple, and she kind of self-styled herself around him. She even hired some folks from Apple to be on her board of directors, and I'm sure that got her access to also to some of the people that were doing PR for Apple. At that time, you can see that she adopted a very kind of Steve Jobs wardrobe and started to speak in a more baritone voice when she did public speaking. Some of her instructors had mentioned that her normal speaking voice was in a slightly higher register. And again, I'm not gonna bag on her for any of that, because we do what we do to be taken seriously. You know, that's all part of that. I can see that. And again, as long as there is true technological progress involved, no issue. Well, it worked. She managed to, through a series of friends, possibly also through Tim Draper and other family connections, she got an audience with Larry Ellison, the head of Oracle. And Larry Ellison, he was into Theranos by the end of when all was said and done. He was into Theranos for $100 million. That is where I think we start to see a shift in Elizabeth Holmes's focus. She's now no longer focused on the device and all that. Now she's laser focused on the fundraising, on the money, and what it is she needs to do to kind of keep that rolling in. And we start to see some rapid development, obviously, with that kind of infusion of cash. We are seeing just before 2008, that's going to become important, obviously, for obvious reasons in a minute, but their initial headquarters was in Palo Alto, so they started a R&D research lab in Newark, California. It's near Fremont, actually not too far from Tesla's Fremont factory, oddly enough, and around the same time, they were all kind of building this all up in and around 2008, 2010. But with this new inflection of cash, she can now really start to assemble all the people that she feels she needs to get it done. And boy, did she. She had an all-star board. General Mad Dog Mattis. She had an ex-admiral. She had two former secretaries of state, Kissinger and Schultz. And it was just an absolute all-star board that seemed to be tailor-designed to do two things. Firstly, to be able to just wade through all of the red tape that I'm sure she and others knew were absolutely going to come. I mean, if you're trying to disrupt an industry on that level, there's a lot that's going to, you're going to need a lot of help. You're going to need a lot of governmental help to kind of grease the cogs. So she assembled that board on that basis, but also, if you look very closely at that board, what you notice is that nobody that she brought on board had a lot of medical experience, direct medical device experience or testing experience. I think she had one surgeon that was on the board, and that was as close as it ever got to anything medical. So that probably, with some of the investors, should have been a bit of a red flag. And we mentioned earlier that I felt that I would be caught up in all of this. Now, here's why I feel that that's the case. Theranos, it dealt with every discipline that I had. Not only was it a company that I could see myself becoming involved with, a medical device company, something to help people, something so that my efforts would be felt on a broader scale than just figuring out the equipment to design the grill on the next Ford F-150. So that would have gotten my attention. And then all of the disciplines that I had, advanced rapid prototyping, using stereolithography to do what's called additive manufacturing, where you're actually able to take something from a concept, something from a prototype, and bring that directly into a manufacturing stage. And then obviously electronics, robotics, and then because of my experience with these stereolithography devices, within those devices were very accurate microcontrolled optics and lasers and data capturing. I had a lot of experience with image learning, where you could actually teach a camera a variety of objects, and they can then discern and remember and look for changes in all of that. all the things that would directly relate to this type of device. So I think I would have had a lot to bring to the table. And then, obviously, the connection with Stanford, so I undoubtedly would have heard of this either through Stanford Medical or through the rapid prototyping industry. So if I would have started working with them at this Newark facility, man, the scary thing is I wouldn't have noticed that anything was wrong. And so here is a video clip of the Newark facility that I found. So you see these robots and other devices. These are not commercially available devices. These are devices that were obviously developed in-house. You see this spider bot and some other things that were being used there. Now, all of this was designed to create iterations of future devices, what this thing was really going to look like inside. You first start on a larger scale, trying to emulate equipment that already exists. Siemens had a blood analyzer that was used by a wide variety of different blood labs, right? And Theranos purchased one of these Siemens devices. And so I can see myself working with these devices, trying to match their output with what our results were. Obviously, that's going to be an important step. But what Elizabeth Holmes did was she severed all of the usual communications between various agencies within a company. Now, in the case of Invisalign, again, we are trying to do a comparison between how the two companies did business. In our engineering area, we had a handful of engineers, but they were all around us. And R&D was just a stone's throw away. You could hear them. And so if somebody was on the phone trying to set up a date, even that, a demonstration date, or to arrange visits from various engineering partners, and it was wrong, even something on that trivial level, you'd overhear that and you'd be able to correct them. And then also, obviously, there was the engineering. If we were sharing ideas with R&D, we could get that immediate feedback. And that just didn't exist in Theranos. There was this massive secrecy that was going on. And the reason for that was a paranoia that what they were ultimately doing would be found out by their engineers that were actually working in these laboratories. So now, let's talk a little bit about 2008. What a nightmare. 2008 was just absolutely wretched, and it took us a couple of years to, kind of really recover from that. As everyone's aware, that was the massive mortgage crash, tore everybody apart. Well, we were doing okay by 2008. We had been doing its clinical trials basically since 1998 or so, which was when I first had my introduction to Invisalign. But so they'd been already through their clinical trials, and we'd actually been doing trial cases, actual cases, throughout the early 2000s as we built up our relationships with orthodontists. And so we were doing okay by that point. Well, Elizabeth wasn't. And Elizabeth didn't really have anything for Theranos to sell, because this is where you have to understand how most medical device manufacturers fail. And that is because you have something that you want to do, but you have so many incremental steps that you have to get through to obtain FDA approval. And for us, it was limited because we're talking about an intraoral device. And so we're not talking about something that was an implantable device or something that did something as crazy as analyze blood work where you're going to wind up involving patient diagnosis, right? I mean, that's very serious. So most medical device manufacturers fail because they are not able to adequately budget their investment through that period, that absolutely painful period where you don't have anything to sell, and then all of a sudden the company collapses and you then just have to wind up selling off your patents to whoever will help you recoup, and then you just kind of move on and maybe try something else. So most of the medical devices that you see are developed under the umbrella of much larger companies. You know, we mentioned Siemens. Well, Siemens makes everything. And so when they decided, oh, well, maybe we'll try and do a blood analyzer, man, the amount of money that they must have just shoveled into that project before it actually was able to work. And that's why things like blood tests are so expensive, because you wind up then having to backfill all of that investment to create the device. And this is something that Elizabeth Holmes would have known if she had finished her courses in chemical engineering and then actually taken a few business courses to start a company, or at least initially spoke with somebody who had. Instead, in 2008, she's already burnt through $47 million worth of investment. She's probably got another, I don't know, maybe 80 to even 150 million by this point of investment that's come in. We mentioned Larry Ellison being into him for about $100 million. Well, that was at the very end, and it doesn't, from whatever I've been able to find out, it doesn't seem that he just gave her $100 million. It seems like that was over time, an investment over time. And so 2008 was really tough. And in order to survive, she decided that she was going to try and phone a friend, basically. Now, we mentioned that she knew Mandarin and that was going to come back in an amusing way, as life does. Well, while Elizabeth was in Beijing studying Mandarin, she meets this guy, Rajesh Sunny Balwani. And he had made his fortune in the dot-com boom of the 90s with software. And it wasn't really clear whether or not they had a romantic relationship at the time, but obviously they were close enough that she felt comfortable reaching out to him in 2008 when she was looking for another infusion of capital. So in 2008, she contacts him, and he invests, accounts vary between $13 million and $20 million. But now, because he has that substantial investment of his personal wealth in this, he wants more of a control over what Theranos does with that cash. And so he asked for, and they agreed to make him Chief Operations Officer of Theranos. So it's at this point that things really start to come unglued. Now, there is one last thing that Theranos did that was legitimate, and that was that they had a contract with Pfizer to put the Edison device in the homes of terminally ill cancer patients to look for one specific marker that I guess Pfizer, or actually GlaxoSmithKline, had some kind of a treatment for terminally ill cancer patients that they wanted to monitor. And they were doing separate monitoring on their own, and they were just looking to see how closely the Theranos technology could match the legitimate blood tests. And then if it worked out, I suppose the idea would be there that they would license that out to use in their homes, so that they didn't have to do a full blood draw of somebody that's in that condition. So good thing. But that was the last legitimate thing I ever saw that Theranos was involved in. Everything else was smoke and mirrors. And that even goes to what they were presenting themselves to the board. They were in a romantic relationship by that time, and they were hiding that from their board of directors. And the investors, and you just don't do that. That's just, so that is what got Sunny Balwani on the hook for this recent fraud case. Now, we're going to see them in federal court in October 27th, I believe. And the tragedy, the aftermath of all of this as it broke down was that Elizabeth became so enraptured with all of the attention that she was getting. She was on the cover of Forbes. That she just completely lost sight of everything that she should have been doing as the CEO of the company. She was promising everything, absolutely lying about the capabilities of the machine and where it was deployed. She was saying that it was on life flight helicopters and that the military was looking at it, and none of this was true at all. And so, is she going to get into trouble with that? Well, we'll talk about that just in the very end there. But to close this out, so that this doesn't get too long here, the aftermath of all of this. They decided that they were going to open at Walgreens and create what was called the wellness centers. And as they announced that they were going to do this and go live with these tests, in other words, actually testing blood from these facilities, they had FDA approval, but because of the way that they had hid the fact that they weren't actually using the Edison devices from the FDA, that the FDA approval was based on these labs that Theranos had set up in the Bay Area and in Arizona, because those were the labs that were actually going to be doing the testing of the blood. Well, the problem there was that they were doing full blood draws, not just finger sticks now, mind you, but they were doing full blood draws. But when they got those blood draws back to their lab, they were putting them into these Siemens blood analysis machines, but they were diluting the samples because they were still desperately trying to do research to make the Edison machines work. And you just don't do that. You don't take a process that has FDA approval and then modify it. And well, what you probably think would happen in that situation did happen. People started blowing the whistle because they were getting blood tests back that were just wrong. And this was data that they were then sending out to patients. So the FDA came back in, re-examined what was going on, shut them down, and then everything started to come apart like a house of cards. Now, tragic. You remember that blood scientist that I was telling you about, Dr. Ian Gibbons? Well, when he discovered that they were going to be going live in Walgreens in 2013, he told his wife, nothing works. And as the release date came closer to going live with these blood tests in Walgreens, he committed suicide. And that, coupled with the fact that you had all of these engineers, I remember thinking when I was watching that documentary that what would my life have been like? You know, I working diligently at this lab, trying to make this all work, and then all of a sudden the company dissolves. It ruined my life. So all of these people, I just have great empathy for everybody that was involved in that. And the fact that these engineers, they're looking at absolutely legitimate technology. I want to go throw a couple of videos up here in the side here while we finish up this video. This is all technology that is was either developed at the same time that Theranos was coming apart or developed afterwards, some of which was probably based on Theranos' own patent portfolio. And this is what we're going to close out with. You guys like the crystal ball predictions, so let's go ahead and make one. So, though there are elements of fraud in what happened with Theranos. It wasn't all fraudulent. It was based on legitimate technologies, and we know this because as Theranos had to close out and pay settlements and court fees and lawyers, we know that they had a patent portfolio to sell, and they wouldn't have had that and gotten, I think it was a little over $100 million. They wouldn't have gotten that if the entire company was a fraud. And so there were at least aspects of it that were legitimate. And that leads me to, I suppose, our prediction. They've already dropped a couple of the federal charges against these two. They've dropped the conspiracy charges, and I think that by the time all is said and done, they'll actually drop many of the fraud charges as well. They're probably still going to be on the hook for lying to the board and lying to some of their investors. But as we said earlier, companies fail, and medical device companies, that's a very difficult game. And so because they were actually engaged in legitimate engineering, I think they'll probably get out of most of those charges. But it's just an absolute tragedy all the way around, and needless. It could have been a company that would have worked, maybe not for doing all of the blood tests that they wanted to, but certainly they could have marched towards a legitimacy, and they chose not to. So I hope you found that interesting. It's something that's been plaguing me for the last several weeks here, and so I thought that it was something that I needed to do a video on. And thank you for sitting through this. It was one of our longer videos, and I wish you all of the best as we start to come out of the quarantines that we've all been in and get hopefully more or less back to our normal daily lives, and we will see you again soon.